friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making another all dies no stamps card using Lawn Fawn's Cheery Cherries, and I'm also going to be using the Honeycomb backdrop. I recently used this die to create a card using the new cactus hillside border, and I want to use the little pieces that were left over from the frame to create a new card. So I'm going to start by die cutting the pieces of my cherries. I'm going to use some guava cardstock, chocolate bar, sage leaf, and the new algae, which is all from Lawn Fawn. So I'll cut the cherries out of the guava, the stems out of the chocolate bar, and the leaves out of sage leaf and the algae. So I ran those through my die cutting machine, and I did 2 each of the green color. So I have 2 of the algae leaves and 2 of the sage leaf leaves, and they are attached to the stems, but I am going to trim those off in just a second because I want to use the brown cardstock for the actual stem part. So I'm just popping everything out of the cardstock, and while I am die cutting things, I'm also going to die cut part of my sentiment now so that I can ink blend that as well. I'm going to use Finley's ABCs, and I'm going to spell out the word cherry. Now there's only one R, so I will have to run the R back through a second time, but that's no big deal. I'm just taping those letters into place so that they don't shift. And then I will pop those out as well and just pop those little dies back onto my magnetic sheet. The letters I'm going to add to my little dish of die cuts, and then we can move on to the ink blending. So first I'm going to work on the leaves, and I'm going to take my Cutter Bee Teflon coated scissors and just trim the leaf off of the stem so that I just have that to work with. It's going to be a little bit easier to do my ink blending without that attached. So I'll get those out of the way now, and then I can bring in my inks. I'm going to use some evergreen bough first, and I'm going to add that to the sage leaves. I'm going to use a tiny little blending brush and add that to the base of each leaf where it is where it would be attached to the stem, and then also on the underside. Originally, I was going to use the evergreen bough on just the sage leaf because it is a nice match for that. But on a whim, I kind of decided to use a bit of the extra ink that was still on that brush and also on the mat and just add that to the algae leaves. And I really liked the way that that looked. And then I brought in the mowed lawn for the algae leaves and darkened those up. But I really liked the way that the evergreen bough had made them a little bit more blue toned, which helped them match a bit with the sage leaf. So I added some mowed lawn to the sage leaves as well, and then I went back and added some of that evergreen bough to all 4 of them for a final touch. And then I'm going to set these leaves aside to dry. And next I'm going to work on the stem, which is the chocolate bar cardstock. And I'm going to darken that up with some vintage photo ink. And I've got another one of those tiny little pencil style blending brushes. And I'm only going to add that ink to the ends, not the leaf because the leaf is going to get covered up anyway, but just the top and then the 2 ends at the bottom. Then I'm going to move on to the cherries, which are die cut out of guava cardstock, and I'm going to darken those up first with some festive berries. I want to kind of take up most of that pink area and make them just a little bit brighter, but I want to leave a little bit of that guava cardstock plain for an extra highlight. So I'm just working my way around those cherries, making sure that I'm adding that down toward the edges, highlighting that stitching detail, and then I'm going to darken that up even further. So once I'm happy with how the festive berries are looking, I'm going to bring in my next shade, which is Candied Apple, and I'm going to darken those up a bit. This is just a little bit more of a vibrant red. It's a less pink. And so I'm going to add that next. I do wish that I had more of a maroon colored Distress Oxide ink, but I don't. If you have a good one that I should pick up, please let me know. But to try to darken those up even further and create more of like a deep red, I decided to add in a little bit of the vintage photo around the edges and then go back over that with the candied apple so it doesn't look so brown. It just looks a bit richer and more saturated. But yeah, like I said, if there is a maroon colored Distress Oxide that I'm not aware of, let me know. I know that there is like an aged mahogany. I don't know if that's the right tone or not, but I would love something that would darken up these red fruits like cherries, strawberries, apples, etc. So the cherries are looking good. I'm going to set those aside and lay out my letters. And I'm going to basically do the same treatment to these as I did with the cherries themselves, but this time it's going to be more of an ombre look. So I'm going to leave a little bit of that guava cardstock showing at the very top, and then I'm going to add in the festive berries. Just blending that on really carefully. And by the way, I did wipe off this brush in between uses with a baby wipe, but I plan to just use one for red, one for green, one for browns, one for whatever. You know, I only have a handful of these, and I'm not sure where they're from because one of you guys sent them to me, which was so sweet of you. But yeah, I think they're just like a regular makeup brush. I'm not sure if they're meant for crafting or not. But they really did come in handy for this, for getting in those tiny little areas. So I'm very grateful to have them. So I'm just working my way down to the vintage photo and then going back over that vintage photo with the candied apple again so it gets that dark red and doesn't look brown. Then I'll pick up those letters with some tweezers since they're still very inky and set them aside to dry. Moving on to my focal panel, I'm going to take some Lawn Fawn speckled eggshell cardstock, and I am die cutting that with one of the stitched circle stackables. It was the third largest, and this is where I am going to build my little scene. So I'm going to start by inserting the brown stem into the little cherries. There's some little die cut marks that you can just slip those down into. And then I'm going to flip that over and grab a little piece of Post-it tape and add that because it's such a small little area that I tucked in. You could stick them down deeper, I just didn't want to. And then once I have those kind of taped in place, I can lift it up a little bit and squeeze a tiny drop of glue behind the base of those stems so that they're adhered well. And see, those cherries are still kind of inky, so I've got a little bit of ink on that focal panel, but it's not a big deal. I'll just make sure to cover that up when I add my cherries. But I'm going to take one of the sage leaf leaves and add that over top of the brown one and see how that is looking. There's a little bit of kind of fibers hanging off the edges of the die cut, so I just smooth those away with my fingernail, and now I'm going to arrange those extra leaves underneath the cherries, trying to get a look that I like. And then once I'm happy with that, I will pick them up, starting with the one that is going to be the furthest in the back, which is the sage leaf, and then I will glue those down into place. And I wanted those to just hang off the edge of the focal panel a little bit, just to kind of extend that scene out. Then I'll add some liquid glue to the back of my cherries, and I will add those over top of the leaves. Once I have those on there, I am going to just take another look and see how that is. I decided to move the cherries down just slightly, which meant that it covered up more of the leaves than I wanted to, so I just readjusted those really quick while that glue was still wet, pulled them out, and had them stick out just a little bit farther. I wanted to create a little mat for my focal panel, so I'm going to take the scalloped circle stackables and figure out which one I need, and it ended up being the second largest, and I'll die cut that out of a piece of barn red cardstock, and my scrap was exactly the right size. So I am going to set that aside for now and work on my sentiment. I'm going to use one from the Berry Special stamp set, and I'm masking off part of it. I do want the whole phrase of the sentiment, but I want there to be a separation between the two parts. You'll see what I mean here in just a minute. So I am stamping that onto some chocolate bar cardstock, and I'm masking off the word happy birthday with a little bit of post-it tape. And I forgot to remove the mask when I stamped it down the first time, so I did get a little bit of Versamark ink on the cardstock where I didn't want it, but it's okay, it's fixable. And then I just moved that sentiment over, and now I'm masking the have a and stamping out the rest of the phrase, which is happy birthday. I'll coat that in some Lawn Fawn white embossing powder, which I just keep in this large tin to make it easier to pour. Make sure that that is very well coated, and then of course some of the powder stuck where I didn't want it because it had some of that Versamark ink on there. So I'm just going to take a dry paintbrush and wipe away all of the powder where I don't want it. So I just want to have Hava on one side and then happy birthday on the other. Then I can grab my heat gun and heat that off to the side for about 30 seconds, and then I'll bring it to that cardstock. And I like to do it from both the back and the front. It eliminates some of the warping, but it also prevents the powder from getting scorched, so it stays bright white. And then I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI, which is going to be another speckled eggshell card base. I just scored and folded it to a standard A2 size card, and I'm stamping in lobster ink, and I did You're Totally My Jam because that just seemed to go along with the cherry theme. So now it's time to use up the leftover pieces from the honeycomb backdrop. So I am going to select certain pieces to use. I actually don't want to use all of those little honeycomb pieces. I just want to have a few of them, a good amount, but not the whole thing. So I'm kind of picking and choosing different ones to add and putting some liquid glue on the back of those. And I'm trying to work quickly because this glue does dry fast, so I want to make sure that I get these adhered before that happens. So I'm doing the bottom left corner and the top right. It's reversed on the die because once I flip it over, it will be on the right side. So then I'm going to line my card base over top, flip that over carefully, and then I will grab a craft pick and start poking out those pieces. It was a little bit sharp for the larger one, so I ended up switching to my Studio Katia embellishment wand so it wouldn't leave little pinpricks, but I needed the craft pick to get into the smaller little sections for the side pieces. And then once I've given that glue about a minute to adhere, I can start to lift off that die, and I'm going to use those tools once again just to make sure that those pieces are releasing from the die. It's kind of like turning a cake out of the pan when it first comes out of the oven. You just have to work slowly and give the pieces time to disengage from that die and make sure that they are stuck down to that cardstock. So once I'm happy with that, I will lift that up and then I can assess how it is looking. And if I feel like there are any missing gaps, I can also just stick a few down here and there. Just pop those out and line them up within the pattern. It's pretty easy to match up that pattern because it's all straight edges on the outside. And just stick those back down into place and use that craft pick once again to make sure that they're the same distance apart from each other as they should be. But after laying the focal panel over top of the card, I realized that I did want a few more of these little honeycomb pieces. I just wanted to fill in that background a little bit. It was bare in some places, so I just lined it back up after adding that glue to the pieces that I wanted, and I'm going to repeat that process. And because the die is the same exact size as an A2 standard size card, it's very easy to line it back up with the card front and just pop those pieces back down where I wanted them. And then once I'm happy with how that is, I can lift that up, and I decided I like that a lot better. I'm going to tip the card base over to release any of the loose pieces, and then I can add my focal panel. So I'm going to put some liquid glue on the back of that and adhere it to the scalloped circle, and make sure that the top point of the cherry is kind of pointing up to one of the scallops. That way I can make sure it's even. Then I added some foam tape to the back of that, and I'm going to center that on my card front and pop that down into place. So I trimmed down the Hava and Happy Birthday with the smallest of the everyday sentiment banners, and I have the flag end pointing toward the inside of the card. So I'm going to add the Hava at the left hand side there, right under the focal panel, and then I will line up my cherry die cuts and make sure that they are spelled correctly and spaced nicely across the card. So the first try I had it a little bit too far to the right hand side, so I'm just going to shift things over a bit, and I ended up having to move that banner up just a tiny bit more just to make a bit of extra room for those larger letters. And I made sure to line up the edge of that banner with the edge of the honeycomb pattern, so we still maintain that nice border of the speckled eggshell cardstock all the way around. So it did take me a little bit to make sure that I had those letters lined up where I wanted them, but once I did, I just started adhering those down, and I did cut down tiny little strips of foam tape to go behind all of those, which was a little bit of a pain, but I think it was worth it because they wouldn't have laid flat over the honeycomb backdrop because it is missing in places. So anywhere where the letters were not like fully supported, you would have been able to see that if I would have glued them flat to the card. So even though it was a little bit of a pain to cut down all of the foam tape and peel off all of those release papers, it was definitely worth it because it did make the sentiment much more of a statement to have that bit of dimension and also to have them appear, nice and level on the card. So once I'm happy with those letters, I'm just going to grab the rest of the banner, which says Happy Birthday, and then I'll line that up with the right hand side where those honeycomb pieces stop. So I felt like there was something missing on the focal panel, and it felt like there was like a gap on the left hand side. So I ended up pulling out a couple of hearts from the Heart Garden border and die cutting those out of more of the guava cardstock. I added just a touch of the Festive Berries Distress Oxide ink to those to make those have the same bit of definition as the other die cuts, and I just glued those in place on that left hand side, and I feel like that really helped to complete this card. So all that's left is to add a little bit of glitter. I'm going to add some to those two hearts. I'll also add just a little bit to my cherries, and I kind of spread it around with my fingers to make it look a little bit softer, almost like it's just the shine of the cherries in the light. And then I also added it down to the bottom of each of my letters to just have a bit more of that glitter down there as well. And that is going to finish off this card, so I'll lift that up so you can see all of the detail and hopefully catch some of that sparkle and shine, and of course give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I hope you enjoyed seeing me use up those leftover little honeycomb pieces. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I love to hear from you guys. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted whenever I post a new video. All of the products I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye!